Did you know that laws and policies have been passed to misconstrue the image of the Nation of Islam and deter people from listening to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's message of truth? When you find folks working this hard to block others from hearing what one man says, they're insulting the intelligence of the American people, as if we're too dumb to listen for ourselves without their final approval. But that's typical behavior for slave masters, to try and silence those who challenge the order of white supremacy. And unfortunately, this chiefly describes the practices of America's educational systems. Think, why is it that public schools encourage us to uphold America's national anthem, but they didn't teach us it was written by a vicious slave owner, Francis Scott Key, and that it was about preserving slavery? Why has there been more emphasis placed on sympathizing with the Jewish Holocaust while downplaying the most heinous, dehumanizing aspect of history, the transatlantic slave trade? For educators to suppress the facts of Black folks' unparalleled suffering is outright negligent. Which is why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was given divine insight, uniquely designed for a people who've undergone a type of slavery and suffering unlike any other. He set up separate and independent educational institutions necessary to address the unique ills endured by this special people. Like a patient in ICU who has to be separated from others because of the severity of his or her illness, Muhammad developed independent Black schools that aren't bound by America's racist educational framework. Because of this, he and his followers were attacked and arrested by police in 1934. So the Muslims suffered to trailblaze independent Black education with a program that proved to be more successful than all of America's educational resources when it comes to producing something tangible for Black independence. Elijah Muhammad, who only had a third-grade education, eventually became the most powerful Black man in America, despite being targeted by Western governments. He developed the Nation of Islam and made Malcolm X that iconic spokesman for Black nationalism. The same program that taught, emboldened, and guided Muhammad Ali to stand up against unjust powers and shake up the world. It's this teaching that made Minister Farrakhan into that spiritual giant who has world governments and militaries afraid of the truth he speaks. The teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad redefine what is called Black liberation theology. It would be hypocritical for educators to advocate culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching if we don't acknowledge those who produce some of the most prolific thinkers, leaders, and paradigm shifters of the modern world. The NOI continues to produce paradigm shifters who are changing the educational dynamics of America. Look at the child prodigy, DJ Tillman, who caught national attention when she graduated with a second college degree at 12 years old. What didn't catch the news is the fact that she and her family credited the Nation of Islam for grooming her academic upbringing. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught that we must have a true and thorough knowledge of self, a knowledge that includes our true divine origins, our purpose, and prophetic destiny, something that America's leaders have long feared. That's why the Nation of Islam has been able to produce so many game changers who upset white world dominance. Because this type of revelatory knowledge causes critical, divergent thinking outside of America's racist framework. It's viewed as a threat because it exposes those who distort this divine truth from our people. Much of today's education is like slavery in the days of Nat Turner, whereas the slave masters taught him to read for the purposes of preaching a doctrine that made good slaves. They never wanted him to read those scriptures that would induce thinking outside of slavery. Public schools have some of the greatest teachers, but these teachers are often restricted to implementing whitewashed curriculum. And many are punished if they prompt thinking beyond the approved curriculum. They're like brilliant butterflies who've been limited to working within a spider web, unable to really change the structure. This is exactly why world governments have enacted policies to prevent people from listening to educational revolutionaries like Brother Farrakhan. Wouldn't it be wise to study the pedagogy of a man who brought over 1 million black men together in one place without one fight or one argument? Especially when schools can barely survive a day without heated altercations. Educators would be wise to objectively study the Nation of Islam's teachings.